Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. I've done over 500 of them now, and if this is new to you and you'd like to check out previous ones, please go to batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, and look at the past interviews menu and the sub-menus under that. You'll find all the previous ones archived in various ways. This program is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers. So if you appreciate it and would like to support it in any amount, large or small, there's a PayPal button on every page of the site. My guest today is Daniel Schmidt. Daniel is the creator of the award-winning film Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. Let me just show you the cover of that film. There it is, Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, as well as the ongoing Samadhi series. And he's also the founder of the Awaken the World initiative, whose purpose it is to bring the ancient teachings of Samadhi back to the world for free in as many languages as possible. We'll be defining Samadhi in a few minutes. Dan's approach combines self-inquiry with traditional forms of meditation so that participants have the opportunity to simultaneously realize their transcendent nature and to purify themselves of conditioned patterns. The pathless path is to realize an ever-deepening development process within the self-structure and to simultaneously realize what is always already beyond the self-structure. Samadhi is when the world that is constantly changing merges or unites with the changeless. That's a good definition. So welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You know, over the years, I've kind of glimpsed your movies online and thought, well, those would be very interesting to watch, but I think I'll wait until I interview this guy, which I'm sure I eventually will, and then I'll just, totally immerse myself in them, and that's what I've done over the past week, watching just about all of the movies I just mentioned, which are a marvelous creation. I mean, the amount of creativity and ingenuity that went into their creation is amazing. I'd like to, in the course of our conversation, let's talk about how you did them and where you got all the ideas for doing them and so on. And hopefully this conversation will inspire others to watch them if they haven't done so already. And you're doing more, so we'll stay tuned, everybody. So how did you get interested in all this stuff to begin with?
So I guess all this stuff, you mean meditation?
Yeah, the whole spiritual shtick.
Yeah. So, I grew up as a Catholic, so to me, I rebelled against everything in the religious world. I didn't really know anything about meditation, yoga. I actually thought it was complete nonsense. And I was just kind of going about my life. And well, actually, I should back up. Like when I was a really young child, I was having experiences of sort of, I could lucid dream and travel at night and stuff like that. And I was very connected to, the other levels or other realms. But that got shut down at a certain point. I kind of had to protect myself at a certain point and just kind of intuitively closed it off because, my family thought I was being really weird. And they thought maybe I had schizophrenia or something. And I knew, like, just for self-preservation, I had to shut it down. So
you would tell them, like, these little people were in my room last night or whatever, things like that, and they would just think
things like that. Yeah, well, and in like I would literally see angels above my sister's beds and stuff like that. But also, as I was going through puberty, when energy started awakening, I was having like a Kundalini kind of awakening experience, but I had absolutely no idea what that was or how to manage it or
what were you actually experiencing as those Kundalini things? I mean, how do you know that's what it was? Now,
yeah,
how do you now know that's what it was?
In retrospect, now I know that's what it was. But at the time, like the actual subjective experience was, I would get this feeling that there was like an intelligence inside my body, basically, and it was accompanied by like my ego structure at that time, which was very undeveloped, was terrified. It was like this sort of visceral fear would come over my body as I was lying in bed waiting to go to sleep, and I would know when this energy is coming on. It was like some intelligence inside, and I could feel like an energy moving up the back of the head and the crown, and I would actually get sort of taken over by this energy. Like it felt like something moving my body around, and it was out like the deepest sense of mortal terror from the self structure's point of view. So my family would my dad would find me curled up in a fetal position screaming, or one time I went into their bedroom and I had this profound sense of what this world was and what this life was. And I got on top of them in the middle of the night. It's like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and screaming, "You're all already dead. You're all already dead." and it just terrified them. They thought, I was some kind of exorcist kid or something. So
wow.
So and as this went on, I was very sensitive to people's reaction to it as well. So I realized this is not going well, and I need to basically shut this down. Whatever's going on.
Yeah.
So when that happened, when I shut it down, and I'm not sure how I did that. I kind of willed with my ego to shut it down. So I lost that childlike capacity to explore in my dreams, and I used to be able to fly and all that kind of stuff, and I would have these amazing encounters. So all of that disappeared at that time as well, and I just became like a normal kid, or well, I guess people who knew me might not say that, but comparatively normal.
2 quick observations here. One is, I'm sure you've heard that Kundalini experts say that Kundalini can have awoken in previous lives, and then we die, and when we are reborn, it's already awake, and it just kind of resumes its process.
Yeah.
So there's that.
I totally agree with that, and to me, that there's something that was happening that it's like this pattern of awareness, like somehow the whole experience was accompanied by this way of perceiving my inner world, that it's like my consciousness would just start to get locked into the inner world and observing inner energy in a certain way. And I didn't learn that, but it was like it came with me somehow. It was like a switch got turned on, and it was, that pattern was just there.
Yeah. They're just picking up where you left off.
I guess.
And then another thing I'm sure you've heard is that when the energy rises like that, the ego can feel threatened because it faces this dissolution. You have like stories like Suzanne Siegel, Collision with the Infinite, if you've ever read that book, where there's just abject terror because everything you know yourself to be is being dissolved, and if you don't know what's going on, it can be real scary.
Yeah. The terror that I experienced was like, I can't explain how palpable it was. It was like primordial terror. It wasn't like, even if somebody had come up to me with a gun, and put it to my head, it wasn't logical terror. It was more just this blind, irrational, and palpable sense of death and of losing myself at that time.
Well, the word primordial is very apt. There's a line in the Upanishads which says, certainly all fear is born of duality. So it's like the very initial sprouting of duality from the unified field. It births fear at that primordial level. And it's kind of like with crossing, a plane, breaking the sound barrier, when we sort of reverse the process and again traverse that primordial level back to unity, we can experience that root fear that is primordial, the most primordial thing there is.
Yeah, and I've only, I think, only in my adult life revisited that fear once, and that was actually at my first 10-day Vipassana retreat. And I had that energy sort of awoke again, and at that time I went to see the teacher there and told them about it, and they said, just go back, observe the breath, and don't worry about it. But when it awakened there, though, it was interesting. Like it was more. I actually felt almost like a coldness in the room. It was so large. But then, the same energy now, when I experience it, it's blissful now because my consciousness is inhabiting it, and so it's like the ego just gets used to letting go or dying or whatever you want to call that, and so that very same sensation is, it's if it's contracted, then it's fear, but if it's not contracted, it's just freedom. It's bliss, actually.
Yeah. Well, you know what FDR said in his second inaugural address? He said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I think there's several factors which can determine how fearful it's going to be. One is how quickly it happens. If it's if it's a whole bunch all at once, that can be rather traumatic. Otherwise, it can just be a very gradual, incremental process, and you don't notice much happening, and you just kind of ease through it. And then another is whether you understand what's going on. Because if, like Suzanne Siegel, you have no idea what's happening, you can be fighting against something which could actually be blissful if you were to relax into it with understanding.
Yeah, and especially in our society, we have when things like that happen to a little kid, for example, I think the psych wards are filled with people. You just get medicated in our system where people don't know how to deal with this. Whereas in an indigenous culture or some of the shamanic cultures, they may see that as a sign that you're ready for some spiritual training, or but yeah.
And of course, you mentioned Catholicism. There have been adepts and mystics in the Christian tradition who would have understood very well what you're talking about, because they went through
Absolutely.
it. St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, all that.
Yeah, I've come full circle with Christianity in my own path. I really have come to see actually one of my biggest influences. My teacher Nico is he uses a lot of Christian language, and and I actually, a big part of the next film is seeing the one perennial truth in all of these traditions. And I'm particularly drawn to the teachings of John of the Cross. You mentioned Saint Teresa, Meister Eckhart, and Saint Francis. I think all of these experiences and awakenings that they're having, it's just Christian language, but it's the same as in every tradition, I think.
I should put you in touch with a couple of people. Mirabai Starr, who did translations of St. John of the Cross, and my friend Dana Sawyer, who was friends with Aldous Huxley and Houston Smith and wrote biographies of them both. They could probably be helpful to your project.
Wonderful. Yeah. I'm right now I'm in that sort of taking in mode, like just gathering and synthesizing and exploring all of it. So it'd be a perfect time because things are germinating right now.
Great. Okay, so you got past the fear phase. You clamped it down, stuffed it.
Yeah,
became a normal teenager.
Yeah, so I really, I got into philosophy. I went to school for philosophy at Western, and then I actually went to law school. And you had mentioned before the interview started about how sometimes it seems like your entire life is, you know, it's at one point it might seem like a series of random events, but then later on you see that you're being prepared for something. And it really seems like that. Like even my year of law school, I thought it was a complete waste of time at the time, because it was totally not what I wanted to do, which can be helpful. I mean, learning exactly what you don't want to do is a teaching. But now, like working with these films, there is a legal aspect and dealing with contracts and all that stuff, and the philosophy is part of it, and you know, and my path led me. I always was creating music. My mom was a music teacher, so I learned music when I was a little kid. So I got into creating music for my friends' films. I had friends in film school, and so I was exploring music all along the way, and that sort of took me into the television and film world, and formed a company with some friends, and we were delivering a series for Discovery Channel, and we were just young, you know, just doing what people do. I was just I thought it was cool, you know, and I wanted to make money. I was completely embedded in the matrix. I was like, you know, totally, you know, playing video games, you know, drinking lime coolers and up till 3 a.m, and, you know, just abusing my body. Didn't know how to feed myself or, you know, take care of this vessel. So, you know, after years of that, whatever spirit is in me, or whatever, however you want to say it, you know, something rebelled and just hammered me, and I developed an autoimmune, just overnight, basically, an autoimmune disorder, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, like just got hammered, and I was forced to try and figure out how to survive or how to get through this. And I basically had to let go of everything, let go of my relationships, my, you know, everything. Moved out of Toronto into a tiny little place in the middle of nowhere to heal. Was close to nature. And you know, so that was the beginning. And during that time, you know, my mind, really it was the diabetes was the biggest problem, because I was doing everything backwards, everything wrong. Like I thought maybe I had a parasite, so I was doing these cleanses. I was doing some cleanse where I'm like drinking, you know, like lemonade with honey and stuff like that. So I'm spiking my blood sugar. Yeah, and so like it took me several years to actually get the diagnosis of diabetes. So so for a couple of years, it was like my blood was boiling. It was excruciating, and I couldn't sleep. So so my mind was going and worrying and fear, and I was losing huge amounts of weight. I went from like 160 pounds down to like 120, and I was at one point I was like a skeleton, and so I was worried, and I desperately just wanted to get some sleep, actually. And I had a friend who was, he had that afterglow from coming back from a Vipassana retreat, and he said, you know, why don't you do that? He was very intuitive, and he could tell a lot of my issues were my mind, you know, like my mind was just pathological at that point. And so I figured I have nothing to lose, and I saw it had benefited him. And I went to the Vipassana retreat with no idea what it was. I literally hadn't even read their website. So I just went on his advice. So I had true beginner's mind, like totally ignorant of anything that was happening there, and which was good. So it was SM Goenka doing the teaching on the screen, and I just kind of surrendered. I just thought, okay, I'm going to go with it. He was very adamant, you know, just follow the technique and everything. So I did, and I had you know, excruciating pain in my body. Like the rheumatoid arthritis was down like deep into my bones, and I was sitting there like trying to meditate, and mind going crazy, and I'd be collapsing and pain and sitting up collapsing, and it was like, it pushed me 100%, like beyond what I could handle, and something gave way, I guess, in that. Like I was determined. I almost left actually after the first day and second day, and a couple people talked me through it, and luckily I stuck with it. I don't know why, like something in me, just grace or something, I don't know, but I'm not sure why I was so determined to do it, but the something gave way, and I see, like, some people with meditation. I've studied a little bit of Ayurveda, and they talk about the doshas and body type, and I'm very Vata. So my tendency is I seem to realize states or realize energy awakenings and things very quickly, but I lose them just as quickly. So at that retreat, I had a samadhi experience, what I would now call a Savikalpa samadhi experience, where I was so in my body, in the energy, doing this body scan, and my awareness merged with my energy field, which connected me to all that is, basically. So during this experience, I was walking around, literally feeling the energy of the universe flowing through me. And I'd walk outside at night, and literally the consciousness of the stars were me looking back at myself. I could feel myself in everything, and it was it was everything I ever wanted. It was like total completion and perfection. I just wanted to stay there forever. And of course, my ego was not prepared for this experience at all. So like every state, it passed, and my ego was desperate, like to how do I get back there? How do I hang on to this? And the more I would grasp at it, the more quickly it started to go away. And I think I was in that state for less than 24 hours. It wasn't that long. And so then by the time I went to bed that night, I fell asleep and then woke up and it was completely gone. And so the next day I experienced absolute loss. I went from being everything to being this little insect creature again. And it was, I think, the only time in my life I actually just wanted to not exist. I was desperate, like to get that experience back. And now I looking back at it, I realized what was missing was I was walking around in that state, and I was sure I was exactly like Jesus, or I was exactly like the Buddha. Like, this was it. This is the state. And but I was identified with that character. I thought this Dan structure was it, right? So I hadn't realized prajna or the truth of what we are. And so I had full on identification. So it was many years later that I started to delve into Zen and self-inquiry, non-dual teachings. And then I had a different kind of samadhi, like the Nirvikalpa samadhi, where you realize form and emptiness as one. There's kind of a collapse of this duality, and you realize it's all there's nothing to be attached to. And the challenge over time is to let these states come and go, to encompass them with equanimity and with consciousness.
Yeah, Ken Wilber talks about states and stages. States are all kinds of things that we can get temporarily. Stages are more permanent, abiding conditions that can eventually arise and become natural.
that's a beautiful distinction. I think that's exactly it. So, to me, I distinguish between, awakening, which is, it's in the moment, it's now, and then there's this enlightenment process that is this continuous development process, and it's like we rewire ourselves, and we create sort of a purified vessel to contain that awareness, so that it doesn't come and go. And for me, I'm still working on the development process. I've had many awakening experiences now in my life, and even doing long sits, there are little awakenings all the time happening, and every once in a while there's the complete cessation of the vrittis, or the whirlpool of the mind. But to live in that state is this, I believe what the yogic traditions are talking about, the growing the inner lotus, the chakras, all of that. We wire ourselves to create this sort of unconditioned self-structure that supports awakening, so that the awareness can just kind of shine through. But so it is a paradox. Like I talk about exactly what you said, actually, like states of samadhi, and then there are the stages of actual living, living life in a stage where that wiring has reached a new level, and there's with each level there is a change in consciousness, and those traditions say when the wiring is permanently at the crown, the energy is moving from the root to the crown, then that is it. That's the, and the depictions of the halos and the, these traditional images, I think are conveying that as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an important point. There's a chance I could shoot a basket from 40 feet out or something like that, but to do that consistently, like Steph Curry or somebody, takes a great deal of training, and probably in the case of this example, of a younger body. But, sometimes people in certain spiritual circles poo-poo the idea of practice because they feel like it's poo-poo, it's like they put it down because it because it implies, they feel that it's going to only reinforce the sense of a practicer, and they feel like, well, the reality is what it is, so just realize that. Why should you have to beat around the bush and do something? But I think, well, you could probably respond to that objection.
It's very tricky. Like one of my favorite teachers is Krishnamurti, and he was very scornful of traditional meditation, because he saw how people doing these techniques, it was a technique is just something conditioned. It's something that we learn. It's within the self structure, and if we're just repeating this thing, people sitting on cushions, doing these practices will never come to that cessation of the whirlpool of the mind if we're engaging in these practices. So I totally agree with Krishnamurti. I agree with everything he's saying, and the way. But I also see that these techniques have value. Like I see them. I love the phrase "a thorn to remove a thorn." I think sometimes like the Vipassana body scan technique is a great example. Like we teach that at the center, along with many other different techniques. And some of these techniques work for some people, and others for other people. So we can use these. I think a good technique is one that is purifying the conditioned patterns. Like it's allowing whatever is in our unconscious. These little programs and sub-programs in our unconscious are just running, and we can't become free of them until we excavate. We basically stop responding to the craving and aversion or the preferences of the conditioned mind. And when we stop, what they call samskaras or sankharas in the Buddhist tradition, start to come up to the surface, and they sort of bloom and die if we just are not attached to them or don't respond to them. So to me, that process, that is working within the framework of the body, and dealing with these unconscious patterns, which is purifying the vessel basically. But also I think what Krishnamurti says is true. Like the absolute awareness just is what it is. It needs no perfecting. It needs no development process. So when you have these awakenings, the paradox or the hard thing to grasp with the mind is that you awaken and you realize it's the same awareness that was always there, and it's been ever present and unchanging, and it's spotless, it's stainless, but it gets obscured over and over by the mind. So it gets entangled with mind, and that's the game of Maya we're playing here. It's this whirlpool of the mind that just snags us over and over. So to me, the way I teach at the center is self-inquiry and meditation simultaneously. So when we're doing a technique, if we're observing the breath or observing the third eye or whatever, doesn't really even matter so much, as long as we're cultivating equanimity and concentration and freeing these sankharas. And but you can also be aware of who is doing this practice at the same time. So rather than just the mind running with this pattern, or I love the Zen story about the polishing the tile. So we're not just polishing tiles at the meditation center, but we're aware.
The story being that you polish a tile or polish a brick, you can polish for the rest of your life. It's never going to become a mirror.
Exactly. So yeah, I should maybe say the story for people who don't know. But yeah. So there's a student who he's sitting in meditation, and the Zen teacher comes and says, "What are you doing?" And the student says, "Well, I'm meditating. I want to become enlightened." And the teacher picks up a stone tile and starts polishing it. And the student says, why are you polishing that tile? And he says, I want it to become a mirror. I want to keep polishing it to become a mirror. And the student says, well, you can do that forever. That stone's never becoming a mirror. And it's the same thing with our practice as well. If it's just the mind doing some conditioned technique, we'll never realize our true nature, because in these ancient traditions, it is a cessation of this whirlpool of the mind that is, it allows you, it's in that absolute stillness, this unfathomable experience happens, or it's not even an experience, because it's the collapse of experience and experiencer. So to me, that's probably the most important thing in meditation, is to realize, like, these techniques are great. Like if we're moving from gross mind that's full of thoughts to subtler mind, subtler, using a thorn to remove a thorn, and then eventually we throw all the thorns away and just come to stillness, and it's in that stillness that prajna, or I sometimes say, I've heard other teachers say this, like it's almost like it happens by accident, but we make ourselves accident prone by doing these practices and techniques. So and I know for me, if I had never done Vipassana meditation and never done all the stuff I'm doing, there's no way, if I was just watching Netflix and drinking beer,
drinking lime coolers,
yeah, it's not going to happen, right? So so it's like we're cultivating this, purifying this vessel, and then maybe there's an element of grace. I don't know what it is, what makes this happen, but it can happen. And I think all we can do as limited ego structures is just prepare, just cultivate the garden, but we don't control what grows in it.
Yeah, let me respond to a few of those points. Firstly, regarding grace, there's that saying, God helps those who help themselves. And there's some cool stories in various scriptures about the disciple or the student putting forth a certain amount of effort, and then once he has done enough effort, then the guru or God or something or other just blesses him with grace, and that accomplishes it. Then, with regard to realizing that that enlightenment was always the natural condition once enlightenment has been attained, it's like the sun is always shining. The sun doesn't care whether there's clouds or not, because the sun is not obscured. From its perspective, it's not obscured by clouds. But it makes a difference to the person on the ground, so to speak, whether there's clouds, and wind can help blow them away. So wind is like a technique, and then once they're blown away, then boom, the sun, it's always been shining. So there's that. And then regarding Krishnamurti, he was a good example, because he spoke from his level of consciousness, and his listeners listened from theirs, and the twain never really met. He sat there and sort of criticized techniques, and people were with him for decades and ended up continuing to be frustrated because he had no way of sort of conveying or enabling them to rise to the level of his experience. So there's a saying in India, when the mangoes are ripe, the branches bend down so that people can easily pick the fruit. So there's something to be said for teaching in such a way that it meets the student at where they're at and enables them to sort of begin to progress. And regarding progress, you've alluded to the notion that we're talking about something very physiological here. All these samskaras and impressions that we're talking about, if physiologists knew how to do it, could be located in the neurophysiology as perhaps chemical or structural imbalances. And so the release or the working out of these samskaras is a neurophysiological process or transformation. And there's been plenty of research to show that during different types of meditation, there are significant physiological changes. And also with long-term meditators, in various traditions and practices, there are significant changes that are abiding, whether the person is meditating or not. The brain itself is significantly restructured, as can be seen from thickening of the frontal cortex and phase coherence between different parts of the brain. In other words, synchrony between the brain waves in different parts of the brain. The healing of functional holes in brain functioning, which are revealed by fMRI scans. So we're really just, through spiritual practice, we're really transforming the physiology to make it a fit vehicle for living this higher state of consciousness, whatever we want to call it. And there was one final point I was going to make. Oh yeah, you're talking about polishing the brick. And it was something you said there made me feel like, well, the measure of an effective practice should be how effectively it enables the mind to settle into samadhi. Yeah, I've heard you allude to the second verse of the Yoga Sutras, Yogascitta Vritti Nirodha. The yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. Okay, so why would that be a good thing, the cessation of fluctuations of the mind? Because then the next verse says, then the seer is established in himself. So it's like choppy water can't reflect the sun very clearly. Still water can reflect it perfectly. You sometimes see these photos of still water, and it looks like the same scene above the lake and below the lake, because the trees or whatever are being reflected perfectly. So a still mind can allow the self to shine forth freely without obstruction or disturbance. And so that's the purpose of that type of practice. And so you could perhaps, measure the worth of practices by how effectively they accomplish that, and you could measure that physiologically as well as by subjective report. So there you go. There's some responses to what you said.
Wow, wonderful. It actually seems like you're using so many examples that I use all the time. So I forgot that you were speaking actually. So that's funny. So yeah, it's
It's the
wonderful.
same person
Yeah, I
speaking,
think
right, Daniel?
so. Yeah, it's I think it's a wonderful use of science. I think like if science can start to really have objective measures for these things, we can open so much up so quickly. And there are amazing things being done. I know I was just checking out David Vago is one who he's at Harvard. He's doing studies with the fMRI and doing. I think he came to some conclusions on the default mode network, which is just the basically when we're just being here, what's going on in the mind, like just our kind of default processing in the mind. And they've found conclusively that meditation, like meditators just have less going on. There's less interruption happening just as you're existing in the present moment. So I think these things are great, just even just to get people excited about meditation and see that there is an objective value. Because really people like that to me is kind of my job with these films as well. Is I can't convey really what happens in meditation. There's nothing I can say or depict or use fractals or but if I can get people curious about it, and I think science there's an incredible possibility there for science to get people curious to look within themselves.
Yeah. One example I've sometimes used is, picture yourself working really hard, like you're working these 12-hour days or whatever, 16-hour days, and you're under a lot of pressure and you're all frazzled and your mind is just crazy and you can't sleep properly and you're drinking a lot of coffee and you're in that state of mind. And then you go on vacation and you're there a couple of weeks just sort of lying on the beach, just relaxing. And by the end of a couple of weeks of vacation, you just feel so mellow and so clear and so kind of happy inside compared to the way you felt. So contrast those two conditions. Now imagine that you could sit twice a day or whatever and enter into that state that you feel after 2 weeks of vacation, for half an hour or an hour or whatever, and then come back to your daily activity. You would not only enjoy that hour or whatever where you sat, but your daily activity, it would carry over into your daily activity. You would feel the influence of it throughout the day. And if you were to do that on a regular basis, the influence would accumulate such that you could never get sort of so perturbed by things as you once did. There was this sort of a stable equanimity that would develop. And again, there would be a physiological reason for that as well as your sort of inner subjective experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I see my own, if I look back 20 years ago when I started meditation, I was full of anxiety and stress and fear and all kinds of stuff. And if I measure, I think the only measure of a meditation practice is, like the Buddha said, it's about freedom from suffering or freedom from the self. And if I just look back over my life, I just have less suffering. And, to me, that's the measure. It's also opened up all these other worlds and things like that. So it's like, I think your antenna starts to, be able to receive, so you have an expanded experience of life. So I guess there's two things. There's freedom from suffering, but then there's freedom to. So you're free to explore all these other aspects of being as well. So I guess it's kind of going in two directions. In some ways we're through this process and wiring, we're expanding the self structure, but we're also realizing the emptiness of the self structure at all these levels as well.
I imagine if you look back on your life, you would say that a lot of the suffering you once experienced was self-inflicted, and you're now there's a sort of a skill in action. The Gita says yoga, yoga karma shukoshalam. Yoga is skill in action. There's a skill in action now which you conduct your life in such a way that you don't create messes for yourself. You don't inflict suffering on yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and Krishnamurti spoke about like the collective ego, as the problem. Like we on this planet, the suffering that we're experiencing is due to the collective ego and identification with whatever we define ourselves. As soon as we create a definition, we create a limitation, and we create an other. If I say I am this, I'm Christian, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim, I'm American, whatever it is, then because of that label, it means some people aren't that, and it creates this disconnect. And I love when he said, the ego is inherently violent. It's a violence. It's a cutting of, or a fragmentation of consciousness from itself.
Yeah, and there's an interesting point you just made a minute ago, which is that even though there's a sort of an emptying out taking place, I don't remember your exact words, at the same time, almost ironically or paradoxically, there is a sort of a fuller and freer expression of your uniqueness and of your individuality. I guess you could say your individuality. I mean, you see that in your own experience and in the lives of sort of people we might respect who seem to have achieved a high level of consciousness, like the Dalai Lama or whoever. There's this sort of richness to their personalities. They're not just all plain vanilla, sort of empty, flat, colorless saps. There's this sort of vibrancy and charisma and fascination that you feel in watching them function. So it's kind of like it frees up what is beautiful within us, not only in the sort of universal sense, but even in terms of our individual qualities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like in the Upanishads, I love, and some of these really ancient teachings, they talk about all these different levels of existence. And, really we are living in this limited reality on the level of the mind and the physical, but there are these other levels of the energy. Like when somebody starts to tap into their Kundalini energy, you see it in their face, you see an aliveness, you see it shining from the eyes, and the Upanishads talk about these other higher levels, like the koshas, the Vijnanamaya kosha and Anandamaya kosha. These are whole realms of existence, that we can experience in life. And when we start making connections with them, there's knowledge, there's wisdom. It's tapping us into stuff that is beyond just our self and our culture. And there is. I believe, to me it's mysterious where a lot of this comes from, but I talked about Akasha in one of the films, and this idea that everything is mind, the first Hermetic principle, all is mind. And even what we think of as deep space, with the Millennium Run simulation, we now know that when you start to map out dark matter, it looks exactly like a brain, complete with neurons and everything. So it is all mind, and we can, I see it as this whole energetic structure that we're inside of can be like an antenna, and we can connect to those higher levels of mind, and the Dharma and these ancient teachings. I think every being who has made that connection, they're sort of bringing in the same truths, but in different ways and different expressions, different unique truths.
Based upon what you just said, this would be a good time to ask a question that came in from Manuel in Vienna, Austria. He asks, in an interview with Cheryl Sitz, you were talking about higher levels of reality beyond the mental and physical level, like the energetic level or the angelic realm. His question is, how can we be sure that altered states of reality experienced through meditation techniques or psychedelics are not just illusions made up by our own mind?
Mm-hmm. And I think, this entire game that we're playing here, this entire universe and existence is all mind. So we can't. It's all, I love Xuanzhu. There's the story about him, the dream of the butterfly. And, it's so real. He was seriously questioning, am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man, or a man dreaming that I'm a butterfly? And this is the question. And to me, it's mysterious. Like as we go deeper, into the meditation world and on the path, and to me, like my experiences of the dream realms, and like dreaming, like as opposed to waking, or these sometimes we call them communications, where we have these connections to the higher self. It's becoming more and more real, seeming real, like more solid, but simultaneously it seems like this so-called real world is becoming a little more dreamlike and a little more permeable, and it's sort of blending, but the awakeness that is at the center of it, the awareness, which is unchanging, to me, that is what we are. That's the essence of what we are. That's the truth. And this is Maya, like in the Upanishads that I was describing, like they use the word Maya, in the description of these things. It is all Maya. And, I'm thinking about the Heart Sutra in Buddhism, where he says, the awakening, or the awakened one, realized all the emptiness of all the levels. I think he was talking about the 5 skandhas, but it's the self structure, basically, like all levels of self. So when we realize that it is illusion, it's all illusion. So I've had weird experiences of these different levels, and some of them I wouldn't want to share because people think I'm insane. But
I think we already established that at the beginning of the interview, right? When you were jumping on your parents.
Yeah. So I got nothing to lose, I guess. But to me, I see it all the same way, right? It's a play of form. It's a play of consciousness, and to me, like my teacher Nico, he talks about the imaginal realm. This is a term kind of coined by a writer named Henry Corbin. He writes about the higher worlds, and he does an exhaustive study, which is fascinating. Carl Jung, actually, his active imagination, a lot of his stuff is based on Henry Corbin's work. And so Nico distinguishes between imaginal, which is the what's going on the higher mind, and imagination, which is a product of the lower mind. And the way that we distinguish between the two in our subjective experience is that when things happen on the imaginal level, there is an actual concrete energetic change. Like we can these symbolic, or these archetypal experiences that can be had, interacting with deities or netters, or strange beings, whatever's happening there, to me, there's some sort of symbolic thing playing out, and if we can kind of dance with it, or play with it, sometimes we may face our fears, we may face different aspects of ourselves, and it can make huge shifts in our actual life, in our actual energy. So to me, I don't really care, about real or unreal. To me, that distinction is just a distinction of the dualistic mind. But what matters to me is, if I'm doing a pure investigation, I'm not just manufacturing something with my mind. I'm when I work with Nico, he'll say, if you start thinking, he'll kick you out. So he'll be like, I just want you to report what's actually happening. Empirical investigation into what is actually happening. And if you're just observing reality as it is, what you're perceiving through whatever faculty, mind, senses, the organs of higher perception, you are just looking at what is, and then it can change your subjective experience in life, and it's exciting. So whether we label it as real or unreal, I think that's just that's just the mind playing its little game.
Yeah. With regard to Manuel's question about how do we know these things that people report, angelic realms and what are made up by our own mind or not, the whole scientific enterprise started out as an attempt to circumvent the fallibility of human subjectivity. In other words, to try to determine what is objectively true regardless of our understanding or misunderstanding of it. And there's several methods which are employed in that, which are, repeatable experiment and empirical experience. If someone comes up with a hypothesis and tests it and gets some results that seem to confirm the hypothesis, he then says, okay, all you other scientists test it also and see what you get. And if they also keep confirming it, then it sort of lends greater and greater credibility to the hypothesis. And if they start poking holes in it, then maybe he has to go back to the drawing board and come up with a better hypothesis. But it's an attempt to understand how the universe actually works. And because prior to that, there were all kinds of kooky ideas about how the universe works. The Earth is the center of the solar system. Galileo developed a telescope through which he could disprove that. The Catholic hierarchy refused to even look through his telescope because they said, no, that violates the Bible or something. So, I think we've made a lot of progress through this method of understanding what's really happening as opposed to our subjective fantasies about what might be happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I see like Aldous Huxley's work on the perennial philosophy, and just my own understanding of these different traditions. Like you see at the root of it, there is one sort of perennial teaching that is coming back. There's these traditions, they talk about chakras or the Sephirot, or there are these different angles, different languages to describe one thing. So I think there is I don't want to say objective truth, but there, to me, like when Plato was speaking of the realm of forms, there is a sort of form to the awakening process. There's a form to whatever it is, the spiral that extends from our DNA to the galaxies. There's an intelligence that's embedded there, and it's expressing in different ways, and we can see in these different traditions how they are reflecting. Some of them are reflecting part of the evolution. Some of them are reflecting the higher levels, and who knows how far it goes. But so to me, I feel like my investigation, with these films is to, there is sort of a form to what is happening, or a truth, and I think science is about getting at that truth, and I'd love to see the convergence, like in the time of in the Platonic period, like Pythagoras, in his time, there was just a search for knowledge and wisdom, and now like back then, music and mathematics and searching the heavens for knowledge, it was all one endeavor, and we didn't have this fragmentation that we have now, and I'd love to see these different fragmented aspects of science come together with this genuine inquiry. And and at the same time, that being said, like in philosophy, I also, you have philosophers like Berkeley, who where to be is to perceive, or be perceived. There is a truth in that as well. So we can use these empirical tools, but at the end of the day, what am I here? I'm a mind, senses, and energy, and this filter, or what Huxley called the reducing valve. It is our interface with the outer. And so to me, there's truth in both of those things. And I always approach it from the relative and absolute. From the relative perspective, we can go into these sort of objective, worldly knowledge of the forms. But then, from a samadhi point of view, like when you're in that place where there is no subject and object, there's an actual collapse of subject-object duality, then, this whole investigation becomes just play, basically.
Yeah, one thing I find inspiring about your films is the discussion. Well, you quote Plato, for instance. You say, there's a golden key that unifies all the mysteries of the universe, the intelligence of the Logos, the mind of God, the intelligence of the universe. I find that inspiring, because a lot of people in spiritual circles seem to just talk about consciousness in kind of a plain vanilla way, without recognizing the intelligence inherent with it. I've interviewed someone recently who, kept insisting there is no such thing as God and your brain creates the universe. But then how do you account for the marvelous, orderliness that we see displayed in the universe? Like you talked about Lie patterns in one of your films, archetypical patterns found at all levels of nature. And here's a quote from Goethe that I picked up from one of your movies. Beauty is a manifestation of the secret natural laws which otherwise would have been hidden from us forever. So a close look at what's actually going on, which science helps us do, to me gives me goosebumps, because it sort of shows that there's some profound level of intelligence and organizing power orchestrating every little particle of creation. And if we extrapolate throughout the whole universe, we realize that wherever we were to look, we would find it functioning there. So what do they say about God? God is supposed to be omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. That's exactly what I just described, in terms of that omnipresent intelligence functioning at all levels, from the vast to the ultra microscopic, and without an error, in complete accordance with beautiful orderly laws, which interestingly correspond with mathematics. That's a whole other topic. But go ahead and respond to what I just said.
Yeah, well, I actually brought a little prop. You talked about Lie patterns. And this is a little something from the next film, actually. And I'm going to put it up against my shirt, but I don't know if you can see it.
Looks like a tree branch thing.
Yeah, so this is called a Lichtenberg figure, and it's very beautiful. I don't know if it's showing up really well on the screen there.
Pretty well, yeah.
But basically, what this is they zap this acrylic block with like 1,000,000 volts of electricity, or some huge amount of electricity. And so basically this structure is the path that the energy took in just like a millisecond. And so this is one of the Lie patterns, the branching patterns. And when people get hit by lightning, you'll sometimes see these Lichtenberg figures on their body, or but everything in nature is this spiral that extends through all these different levels. Like the energy is moving in these branching patterns, and it's exactly what's happening in our mind. So to me, like the path that energy took through our minds is actually us. Like that energy is, it's just the pathway. The mind is just the tendency for that energy to repeat again, just like a river is being carved out. So it's when you see that, and this is one Lie pattern. This is one aspect of this primordial spiral. We've just carved off and started to look at it, and so this intelligence, to me, I have a profound sense of not knowing, when it comes to what this is. It's an awe, actually, at like when I'm to me, like sometimes people, with these films, there's a lot of information, a lot of stuff, and people are like, how did you figure all that out? And I don't know. I truly don't know. Sometimes, like, when I was working in television, it was very cookie cutter and templates. And the way I'm working now, I just meditate, and information comes through, and I just start writing, and then it gets filtered. I work, like my partner Tanya is a huge part of the process as well, because like I seem to be like just tapped into this information, and it just keeps coming and coming and coming, and it's mysterious. I'm in awe. I'm like a little kid, just like kind of marveling at what's happening, and so I'll be writing, but for there's sort of a Shiva Shakti aspect to the way we work. So she, she's very clear on what will kind of connect with people, or what's touching her heart. So I'm getting all this stuff, and it just keeps going. Like I have hundreds and hundreds of pages that I just keep writing. And if I go back and look at it, it's like I've written the same thing over and over, like 10 times. And I'll even do that on the film. Sometimes I'll recreate the same part. So it seems like this endless sort of thing going on, and then Tanya comes along, and somehow there's something operating through her where she just sees, she's kind of ruthless. She like cuts through all the nonsense, and she's like, what is really going to connect with people? What's going to hit their heart? And like you're going off into abstract land here, but I have this tendency. I'll do like a 20-minute section on Buckminster Fuller's vector equilibrium, and people will be like falling asleep, and she's like, you're losing everybody. Like, you can't do that. And so she's like executive producer, and it literally, I couldn't be doing these films. They would not be what they are without her. And they were just sort of stagnating until she came along. So to answer your question, like I think that, if there's one thing I've learned on this path, is the value of not knowing, of like learning the limitation of the egoic mind. And it takes me back to the Platonic, or the Socrates. He said the only thing I know is that I don't know. And to me, that's the truth. Like, that's what meditation is teaching us, is that when we stop the pattern, this endless searching, endless processing in the lower mind, that energy becomes free, and it can connect with the higher realms. And so in the moment, from the egoic perspective, we don't know. We're suspending our knowing. But then if we trust, if we just allow this connection to happen, something greater is out there. There is this world of forms. There is a Dharma. There is big mind, whatever you want to call it, and we can be like a little node in that mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's these guys these days to whom they refer as the new atheists. Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Christopher Hitchens, who died, and one other whose name I forget at the moment. But when I hear, I like listening to them actually. But when I do, I think, dude, you can't be both an atheist and a scientist. You can be an agnostic and a scientist, but if you insist that things are a certain way, then you've shut down. You're not, you don't have a scientific attitude. And there are all kinds of anomalies which challenge your conviction, and you must be not listening to them. So anyway,
yeah, I think language is so divisive. We like those labels, like atheist or believer or whatever it is. It limits us, and it creates division. And half the time, this was a big thing with Buddhism. I found one of my biggest challenges was reconciling this, the idea of anatta, no self, with the soul. And it's like you have half the teachers talking about, there is a soul, and half of them are saying there's no self, there is no soul. But when you really look at what they're actually saying, they're saying the same thing. The anatta is realizing the emptiness of the self structure, but it's not nothing. It's not like a void or emptiness. It's just a non-local consciousness that is everywhere, omnipresent. And and the soul, depending on who's describing it, if you look at the Upanishads and the sheaths of the soul, like the phenomena of the soul, all the different levels are obscuring the essence, the Atman from itself, which is, it has no form, it has no place, it has nothing. It can only know itself or see itself through all these manifestations. So to me, they're identical, but you look at history and look at the descriptions, and it's like going head to head. But I think when you look at the true mystics are all in agreement. They're using different language, but then people who are not realizing it within themselves are, they're holding on to an idea, concept,
and I think even sometimes people who realize it with a fair degree of clarity experientially could have different takes on it according to the flavor of their experience. For instance, in the Vedic knowledge, there's a thing called Shunyavada and another called Purnavada. And one refers to the sort of emptiness and the other to the fullness. And it actually refers to the same thing. But perhaps, different nervous systems, depending on which guna is predominant or which dosa or whatever, could have the very same experience and interpret it differently. And also in terms of other things, like some, person might have transcendent experience. For one, bliss might be predominant. For another, the sense of vastness might be predominant.
Yeah.
For another, the sense of emptiness might be predominant. So it all depends on kind of the instrument through which that is experienced. And if we have the generosity to sort of recognize that, we're all basically talking about the same reality. We're just, like blind men and the elephant, feeling different aspects of it. Then a lot of arguments can be dissipated.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the interesting thing is, like they talk about the jhanas in states of absorption as well into the one. So people will sometimes have a jhana experience, an awakening. Like to me, each jhana, each state of meditative absorption, and I should maybe clarify what that word is. It's like in the yogic tradition, it's dhyana, or it also means Chan. In Chan Buddhism, the word Chan is it, and Zen is the same word as well. So people, you can like when you get into meditation, sometimes like a level of absorption will happen where the mind, part of the mind's operation will stop. Just some of the programming will stop, and there'll be an increase in energy, and it's an awakening experience. And there are many different levels, many different jhanas, many states of absorption. and there can be incredible blissful experiences. There can be deep peace. There can be and I've been fascinated with people who come to the meditation retreats, because there's such a variety of experiences. Some people are experiencing their chakras and colors. Other people are they are seeing different beings, and it's a whole cornucopia of experience. But I think where it all converges, like these jhanas, they talk about the material jhanas, which are to do with form, and I think that's where we get these ecstatic experiences and bliss and satchitananda, and depending on how you use that word, some people are referring to it in different ways. But the immaterial jhanas, as you start getting into these experiences of total dissolution, where you start to experience consciousness in everything, and you start to experience emptiness in everything, then you get to what they call neither perception nor non-perception, which is this essentially big mind, which is sort of that's getting to that point. Is the self structure it has basically become this big mind, or dissolved into a big mind. The drop dissolves into the ocean, and that's when the indescribable happens. Then, or it's not even a happening, but something. That's like the garden laying the groundwork for awakening to happen, and that awakening, is so indescribable, but yet, like the Buddha said, that realization is form. All form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form, and this ultimate truth. When you hear the Zen masters talking about it, it's unmistakable if you've experienced it. And there's no difference in what they're saying, but the problem is language. Like, language is so slippery. Even saying form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form, that's not it. You can't describe it in words. We'll never get a definition. There's something that happens, but it's not even a happening. That's not even the right word, because it's just. It's like the black hole that I described in Samadhi Part 2. There's an event horizon beyond which we cannot talk about this stuff. So we can, to me, like in the meditation center, what's exciting to me is not talking about this stuff and trying to figure it all out, but actually taking people through this stripping away, going through the jhanas, the states of meditative absorption, and having a direct experience of this. And to me, that is what's valuable. So I can hear myself with all these words, and it's like I just want to slap myself, actually, because it's so.
You can have Tonya do it.
Yeah.
Slap you,
she slaps me pretty good. She slapped me right before this, actually.
Good, yeah, just to wake you up.
Her advice to me before this was, don't be an idiot.
Yeah. Irene serves that function very well over here, in terms of keeping us in line and preventing us from acting like idiots. One thing that I find fascinating about all this is, that we're talking about realms that are experienced by, a relative fraction of the general population. And, it could be argued that the whole thing doesn't even exist, that nobody has these experiences, or that there's hallucinations or something like that. And you can imagine, let's say, like, only 1% of the population dreamed, then the general consensus would be that there's no such thing as dreaming. There's a few oddballs who talk about something that they think is dreaming. But, pretty much everyone experiences dreaming. So even though it itself is a kind of a illusory experience, we all agree that it happens. So with regard to this stuff that we're talking about, a pretty pretty small percentage experience it, and throughout history there has been a pretty small percentage, but there's this historical record of people experiencing it, and there's a lot of concurrence, a lot of agreement among all the various records from various parts of the world. Now, perhaps what's going on these days is that that which has been a rarity is becoming a commonality, that through the media, through the kind of things you and I are doing, through all the proliferation of teachers and teachings, which used to be kind of a secret hidden thing, or that are now going public, perhaps reach a time in the next 100, 200, 300 years where people would listen to a conversation like we're having and think, well, these guys were really sort of beating around the bush. I mean, obviously everybody knows this stuff now. I mean, what's the big deal? So like anything else, there's a limitation in terms of how much concepts and words can do justice to experience. I mean, what can you say about the way an apple tastes or the way a flower smells? You really have to experience it yourself to know. But if things become a common experience, then people who have their senses intact can all agree upon the way a flower smells or looks, or the way an apple tastes. And it could get like that with spirituality. It could become so predominant in the culture that it's an agreed upon thing. And I think if such a time were to come, we'll be living in a very different world than we are now.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think even films like The Matrix, they start to permeate the collective unconscious, and if you talk to somebody about living in the Matrix now, most people will have some concept of what that means.
Or Star Wars, May the Force be with you. It popularized the notion of a sort of ubiquitous field of energy or something that interconnects us all.
Yeah. So I think there is a sort of acclimatization that is happening for sure, and I see just the internet is an incredible thing. Like just being able to like 20 years ago, if I made a film and went the normal film festival circuit, I could maybe reach 15,000 people, and now it's like millions can find out about this stuff, and these ancient esoteric teachings that were taught, only by masters to students after 10 years of practice. You can get them on Amazon for $10 now. So it's an amazing time. It's almost too much information out there, because a lot of these things I think get lost in the chaos and of what's out there. And I think there's a danger with meditation. I think it's wonderful what's happening with meditation, like mindfulness, going into the hospitals and schools and different things as well. But what my hope is that the samadhi aspect of it doesn't get lost, in this proliferation of meditation.
I think one thing leads to the next. People go in because they want to lower their blood pressure, and a couple of years later, they're thinking, well, there's more to this than lowering blood pressure, and they start getting into the more profound aspects.
Yeah, and I think so too. Like there are many entry points and stepping stones, and so that's why I think it's all fantastic. I think it's really good, and the side benefits are very well known. So. I think for me, I got into, I think the first kind of teaching I ever got was Deepak Chopra. It was some kind of guided meditation, had music on in the background and everything. And it was, at the time, it was perfect. He got me into, looking inside myself. And, so it's all good. I think there's a place for everything on this path.
Yeah. A question came in, which I might as well ask now. It's a little bit out of context of what we're talking about right now, but we'll just do it. It's from Jean-Francois in Paris. He asks, having watched both your Samadhi movies and greatly appreciated them, I wonder, what is your view on the Kundalini process and its link to Samadhi? The different degrees of Samadhi start to happen once energy reaches Ajna Chakra, or the Makara point, as described in some literature by Joan Harrigan, who's been on Batgap? Can one cultivate this phenomena to reach its full development and make it a positive one? Or is this something that just occurs naturally and spontaneously with spiritual practice?
It's a great question. So I think my understanding of Kundalini and a healthy kind of developmental process is that the Shakti and Shiva have to kind of grow hand in hand. And so if someone has kind of a traumatic event, or sometimes people have experiences in life that will prematurely open up Kundalini, and that's when you start getting into like Kundalini syndrome, and it's like Pandora's box. Basically, it's very, very difficult. I met a lot of people who, when that energy is opened up and they don't have the consciousness to encompass it and inhabit it, just like I did when I was a little kid. It can be terrifying. It can cause, if the ego structure is just determined to do what it wants to do in your life, and this energy is guiding you to do something else, you'll get sick. You'll get, all messed up in all different ways, digestive, endocrine system, everything. There's all kinds of stuff written on that. So to me, the integrated way of it growing is to just live a conscious life. Like it's not separate from your life. Like all of this wiring inside of us is, like if you think about what the chakras are, these psychophysiological centers, like they talk about certain energies being, like the second chakra related to relationships, your sexual centers, being able to bring consciousness to that. Like you need, in order to open these things up, you need to go experience these things. You need to experience life. You need to experience your power to manifest in the world. You need to, do things that push against your heart and open it up. You need self-expression and so living your life, learning to play piano, whatever it is, you're creating wiring inside you. That's all the nadis. It's all, part of this energetic growth that is happening. So I personally, I don't agree with these practices, designed to prematurely, it's like, I think I talked about in the film, it's like trying to force a flower to open. You don't force your flower to open. Like explore life, like live your life, and you will be wired. And if you're doing meditation as part of that, like you grow these centers, you free the energy. Like in Tantra, I love the tantric approach. You're not pushing anything away. Like my Christian upbringing, like a lot of things were considered taboo or bad, but in the tantric approach is go into these things, explore, open up this energy, but do it consciously. And then, you learn to free the energy, and the energy becomes available for the higher levels, the higher chakras. So you go into your sexuality, you go into, experiencing the sensual pleasures, opening up the senses if they're repressed, and you're just like, I'm going to be a good little meditator and just push away all this body stuff. Those centers will be shut down, and you'll never free that energy. So you have to kind of go into life first, and then you experience it, and you experience what causes suffering. You experience the Maya aspect of it all as well, and and experience the joy, pleasure. Like this is life, right? This is the juice of life as well. Like these experiences to me are not, they're not separate from life. So, but in my experience, like to get back to the question, I guess, every samadhi experience I've had has been accompanied by an energetic opening or an energetic almost like dying. I remember my Zen center experience, where it was the first time I really understood this whole system of no escape for the ego. Like, you're locked in and you can't move, and something has to give way inside. Something has to literally die inside, and or you get the hell out of there. But if you're, they don't let you move. So the energy gives way, and to me, there's always a shift of energy, or every shift of consciousness is accompanied by a shift of energy. And to me, it's just common sense. If your energy is going into the old conditioned pattern, it's not available for this higher new experience. So and you remain in that veil, or the clouds in front of the sun, essentially. Yeah.
What you just said about enjoying life, I agree. I mean, life is here to enjoy. But there's also something to be said for sensibility and moderation. I mean, the Buddha talked about the middle way, and there are a lot of verses in the Gita about, this yoga is not for him who eats too much or eats too little or doesn't sleep enough or sleeps too much, or, that kind of stuff. And there have been some gurus, where the scene around them is basically just an ongoing orgy. All kinds of crazy stuff happening. So what we've talked about earlier in the interview about culturing the nervous system and treating it as the body is the temple of the soul, as it says someplace in the Bible, treating it as a vehicle which can carry us to the other shore, you can damage that vehicle through all kinds of behaviors. So enjoy life, but use a little common sense maybe at the same time.
I think, I don't know if you have ever interviewed David Data at all, or
no.
No. Okay. So I heard
I know who he is.
So I heard a great story about him meeting his teacher, and the teacher, the first thing he did, because he was like really kind of good, meditator, being, all the Buddhist virtues and everything. And the first thing the teacher did was, sat him down with a case of beer and said, we're going to drink. And my teacher, Nico, is a little bit that way. The way he sees it is, the way to freedom, you see what conditioned patterns are running. It's not about any particular thing that you have to do or not do. So for one person, drinking beer might be their conditioned pattern, right? Like, they might be, craving it, and they'd like to go unconscious. So for them to awaken, it's to break that pattern, obviously.
But do you break the pattern by indulging in it? I think AA would beg to differ with you.
No, I'm not saying you break it by indulging. So for that person, the path is to stop it, to cut it out.
I see.
So, but for another person who is like afraid of it, and they're afraid.
Have a beer.
They're afraid to lose control. They're afraid to, their head is full of all kinds of virtuous ideas, right? So it's like, no, I can't do that, So they're not free, right? So the particular thing that you're doing isn't it. Like, it's what's going on in your head is it, right? Like, becoming free is not about, I fell into this, with attachment to things. At one point I was like going absolute minimalist with my possessions, and I had a grand piano, and I was like, oh, it's such a, it's such a big thing, and I want to have no attachments, but then I realized, like, I was becoming attached to having no attachments. So, it was like the piano wasn't the problem. It was me. It was my mind,
So moderation, balance. There's no harm in being wealthy, this and that. Just don't do things which damage your nervous system. I mean, that was one of my realizations before I started to meditate, because I'd been taking drugs for about a year, and I was, been arrested a couple of times, dropped out of high school. So I'm sitting there one night on LSD reading a Zen book to steady my mind. And I thought, these guys are really serious, and I'm kind of screwing around. I've been thinking about enlightenment for a year, meanwhile taking drugs the whole time. I thought, if I continue on like this, I could really do some damage, and I'll have to live the rest of my life in a damaged nervous system. Believe me, my thought process wasn't as coherent as it is at the moment as I'm explaining it, but that was the idea I got. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to quit taking drugs and learn to meditate, and hopefully things will improve, and they did.
Yeah.
So I'm just cautioning a bit, I was standing in the grocery store yesterday, waiting for Irene to come from a different part of the store. And I was standing there and happened to be looking at a case of beer on the floor because it had this interesting picture on the case. And this friend of mine who walked up, who's an awakened dude. I mean, he witnesses sleep, and he's aware 24/7. And he said, "Hey, I bet you'd like a beer." I said, "I had one about 10 years ago after cutting the grass. I was really hot one day. A friend offered me one." And he said, "I have one pretty often. I like to have some pizza and a beer." And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." So maybe I'm a little bit repressive, but my father was an alcoholic, so I have an aversion to the whole scene anyway. But
no, I totally I hear what you're saying, and I agree. And my tendency in the past was, even in meditation retreats, I've fried my nervous system. I'd be going in with guns blazing and trying to storm the gates of heaven. And
safety first.
It doesn't work. With the beer example is maybe a bad example. Like for me, I don't drink beer just because I don't appreciate the way. Like it just doesn't. My body doesn't like it, and I don't. I prefer to be more awake than in that state. But I was just kind of using that as an example to. Just to illustrate that, the particular object is not it. And
so. There was a story about Shankara. I doubt this is a true story, but it illustrates the point. He was walking along with some disciples, and he was walking ahead of them. And they saw him stop at something and drink it. And then he kept walking. And when they got up to it, they said, "Oh, it's beer." The way I heard the story, it was beer. And so they drank some, and they all kept walking. And then they got to another thing, and they saw Shankara stop and drink something. And they got up to it and were getting ready to drink it, and they saw that it was molten glass. So, in other words, I won't even elaborate on the point of the story. People probably get something out of it. Okay, let's talk about some other points you sent me that look interesting. I want to loop back to one just for a second that I continue to always find fascinating, and that is the sort of intelligence of the universe, which you illustrate so beautifully in your movies. There's a saying by Brian Swim, who's a cosmologist. He says, "Leave hydrogen alone for 13.7 billion years, and you get giraffes and rose bushes and opera."
I love that.
You probably heard that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so the question is, and there are actually materialists who say, well, the universe is random and meaningless, and the only reason we have all this order and beauty and structure is that there are an infinite number of universes, and we happen to luck out and be in the one where randomly, through chance, everything just kind of came together. But that doesn't make sense, because we have the second law of thermodynamics in this universe, and there's no reason in terms of that law why all this order should have arisen out of chaos. And so, again, I'm fascinated and awed by the orderliness that arises out of, hydrogen, that gave us stars, that ended up exploding, that ended up creating heavier elements, that ended up creating biological life eventually, that ended up with us having this conversation. It just thrills me and intrigues me why all of this should come out of apparent nothingness.
Yeah. I think for some reason I'm thinking of something that Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj spoke about. He spoke about how when fluids come together and the I am appears. Have you heard about that? heard that. Okay. Well, yeah, it's, and to me, when he says that,
What does he mean by that?
yeah, what he means by that is, there's this sort of self-organizing aspect to existence. So he's talking about, within the framework of his body. To me, I don't, maybe, I experience what feels maybe like cerebral spinal fluid, moving, so with in certain awakening experiences, you feel that the energy is conducted.
There's a guy
up the
named
spine.
Mauro Zapatera who talks about that a lot. If you Google him, cerebral spinal fluid, he speaks at the SAND conference. Anyway, continue.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll check that out. So, yeah, so, and to me, I would say even, like energy comes together and the I am appears. It depends how you frame it, right? Like there are all these different levels, right? Like the physical, there's this fluid aspect, there's the pranic aspect, there's a whatever it is that is happening, this convergence happens, and there's an intelligence there. It's an intelligence so great that that consciousness comes into being in the center of it, and the unfathomable thing is that in a samadhi state, everything is that, like every atom, there is an I in every atom. There is, at the center of everything, of every star, every my cup on the table, it's all that. So somehow this consciousness is at the center of it. And in the Upanishads, they we're so enmeshed in this filtering, but when we go beyond the filter, it becomes, I don't want to say clear, but it's the Upanishads, they say, not that which the eye sees, but that by which the eye can see, not that which the ear hears, so that by which the mind thinks, that by which the eye sees, what is that? What is that?
And why should there be eyes and ears and cups and all this stuff? What is that?
Yeah.
How does all this come into being, or into apparent existence at least?
Yeah, and
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had an interesting take on this. He said that until the self is realized, there's really not much talk about really understanding or appreciating what the world is, because who understands it, who appreciates it? You don't even, if the knower doesn't know it itself, there's really no knowledge of any veracity. But he said once the self is realized, then naturally one begins to appreciate the universe more, appreciate the world more, and one begins to have the desire to know how this came about, who created all this, what is that intelligence that gave rise to this beautiful creation. He said that desire becomes more and more intense, or more and more profound, or deep, or whatever, and at a certain point, that creator, whatever we want to define that as being, reveals himself or itself to us. And he said it's like an artist who keeps hearing that there's this guy in this town who just loves my artwork, and he keeps hearing this more and more and more. Finally, he thinks, I'm going to go meet this guy. I'll go to him, because I would. There are so few people who really appreciate my artwork. I'd like to know this person.
Yeah, that's. I love what you said about the Maharishi. I think it's such a true thing. It's like we can't, like that. The answer to the question can never come in the mind, but we can be the answer. We can literally become the answer. So so there's no more questions when you are the answer. It's only the limited mind trying to figure it out, and there's it's. Like, to me, the closest I've come to that is it's like the limited self is in a state of awe, a state of just absolute awe of what is coming out of nothing, coming from this unfathomable center, an unfathomable intelligence that's so far beyond, like to say that we're like a monkey watching it is not even, you know, it's just, you know,
Yeah.
it's mysterious. And
Can you remember that
you know,
Einstein quote about awe that you put in your movie?
generally, I remember it's in there. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but yeah, we're like little children, you know, trying to read this book in a foreign language, you know, and you know, that's it. You know, I have it's a really amazing book by a guy, Alexander Lauterwasser. He's an expert in cymatics. The book is filled with it's called water sound images, and it's images of vibration. And when you look at these things, like page after page after page, you know, he'll show like a gong, you know, vibrating the water and what it looks like. And
Oh yeah, you showed some of that in one of your
it,
movies. Yeah.
yeah, and like some of it, you know, like there's one, I think it's a didgeridoo, and it looks like, you know, some kind of Sanskrit language vibrating, you know, and like just unfathomable complexity arising out of just simple sounds, you know, and these interference patterns creating this unimaginable complexity. But when you see these things, you know, and these are just simple sounds, and you see the complexity and the intelligence in it, and then you think about how much there is in a human being. You know, like this is just a plate of water being vibrated by a note. Like there's so much more going on within us, you know. So it gets to levels of complexity that are just you know, unfathomable.
Yeah, and I think both the Vedas and physics would say that the whole universe arises out of vibration. So you know, this plate of water thing is just a little sort of, you know, home example, but you know, the whole the Vedas themselves are supposed to be sort of vibratory impulses that reside in what is called Akshare, the transcendental Akasha, and that through self-interaction, somehow there's this whole process where the universe emerges and then eventually collapses and emerges again. And physics has corresponding understandings in terms of something they call sequential spontaneous symmetry breaking, where there's this sort of primordial harmony or wholeness, which gets broken into more and more fragments, different, more and more diverse and specific laws of nature through the process of manifestation.
Mm-hmm. I had recently we invited a fellow who does iboga retreats to the center, and I had a sort of a teaching or an experience through that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's an entheogen.
Entheogen, right?
Yeah, sort of like along the line of ayahuasca, but has very different properties. There's a real it's an amazing meditation tool, actually, because there's a real kind of truth component to it, where it shows you kind of the stuff you don't want to see about yourself, and it showed me in a beautiful kind of visual experience, but also energetically within my body. You know, there were these forms, like this sort of ether, and forms just being birthed out of it over and over and over endlessly, and then I felt like you know, the consciousness that I was sort of dancing, you know, and you just do this little dance, and then you dive back into the ether, and another form is born, and that dives back in, and you know, but it showed me, you know, there were some beings that they had as they were diving back in, they had a look of terror on their face. You know, they weren't just kind of going with this dance, you know. So it really showed that, you know, what we're doing, our fears, you know, everything that we're resisting in this world, we're not really dancing that dance for the most part. You know, we're you know, life and death is just arising over and over and over and over. But unless we're aligned with awareness, we don't see it as that dance. We're fearful of this little me getting dissolved back in the primordial soup.
Well, that's the key point, is being aligned with awareness.
Yeah.
which of course words fail because you are awareness, but somehow aligned with yourself, or in tune with yourself, or awake to yourself, or whatever. And then when we say yourself, it has an individual connotation, but it's not really individual. So, you have to sort of take a leap of understanding when we use words, because words are relative and limiting. A couple of questions came in. This is from Rez Abbasi from New York. He says, when you say live life, doesn't that come with attachments, the thing we're advised not to get sucked into? How do you gauge if you're leaning too much into life itself or the objective world?
Yeah, I think we kind of talked. You, I think, mentioned the middle way, the balance, right? So it's just, it's not repressing anything, denying anything that is, like if I have passions, if I have something, I don't want to close that down, but I don't want to indulge it. And my teacher talks about the little bosses, that are inside of us, and you don't want to feed those little bosses. You don't want to be having these autonomous patterns running in you that are ruling your life, where you're grasping at things either. So the middle way is to realize it's like I love the old Buddha statues, like the really old ones that you find in the ancient temples that have the nagas around them. So you have like
snakes.
the Buddha figure in the center, and then you've got these sometimes they're like the chakras. The ones of Patanjali have the 7 chakras, or sometimes 5, but but they're at attention. So it's these lower instincts, these the serpent analogy is that there are these lower forces that have their own agenda, right? Like their cravings, they're these little bosses that govern our lives. So when we awaken as awareness, like in those statues, they're at attention. They're, the master is in the center, and they're at attention. So you don't get rid of the nagas. You don't, that's, you don't cut their heads off, and but you harness them. They become, the lower, the devil is the angel. That it's all one being, right? So we have to learn to allow these things to coexist inside of us. If we're pushing one part of ourselves away, we're fighting with ourselves. We're fighting with our own, with what is inside of us. So so to me, it's like it's the marriage of heaven and hell has to happen inside with these.
There's a couple of Gita verses that I think address his question. Chapter 2, verse 45 says, be without the 3 gunas, which means transcend, which means meditate, which means go into samadhi, right? And then 3 verses later, it says, established in yoga, we could also say established in samadhi, perform action. So he's not just saying, go fight this battle. He's saying, prepare yourself by getting established in the self, getting established in samadhi, then do it. And the outcome will be completely different. It's like if you want to shoot an arrow, do you just put it on the bow and let go? No, you have to pull it back first.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's something there where, like once you've realized your true nature, you're not identified with the self, then you can play with these things as well. At the beginning, there is huge value to having no preference, because that having no preference is the stopping of the vrittis and stopping of this endless cycle of craving and aversion. But then once you've realized the true self, then you're free to play, and you have to be careful still. Like I had I love my Dan structure loves chocolate, I can eat chocolate, and it tastes amazing, and it produces a nice kind of heart feeling. So, why wouldn't I eat it? But I have to there's a little boss that I have to keep an eye on, that, if he starts to get strong, he'll eat too much, and it'll start to hurt my liver, and it's not good for me in excess. So it's, so we get an understanding of these different parts of us that are in play, and we manage them. It's like having a pet, kind of like you don't want to overfeed your pet, but you don't want to starve your pet either.
It's true of just about anything. I mean, little salt on your vegetables makes them taste better. Dump the whole salt shaker on, and you've ruined them. There's so many examples of things that are good in a certain proportion, but too much of it is not good.
Yeah, the golden mean, the middle way. It's all. This is how the yin and yang operate. It's there is a wisdom that we can connect to that sort of guides us. To me, it's very connected to energy. Like when for me, I just feel when things are off. I can just feel in my body that a certain situation is not right, or a certain thing is not good for me, and the energy can be kind of like the canary in the coal mine kind of thing. And even relationships, sometimes the energy, like before I even know consciously, the energy is already deciding things for me. It's already moving in a particular direction.
Good. The question came in. We've kind of covered this one, but maybe you can elaborate a bit. From Rodrigo in Lisbon, Portugal, who asks, what was the process of writing the script of Samadhi?
Yeah, I did mention, so a lot
of
it it came out of meditation, basically. Yeah. So yeah, to me, there's, they speak about, with music, like there's the muse, right? There's a part of us, and it's unfathomable. Like it's, sometimes it's just, you feel drawn.
Do you feel like a channel sometimes, or like, this is bigger than you, and you're just kind of going along for the ride. You're an instrument of the divine, or of something much wiser and larger than yourself.
Yeah, and and I'm even saying that, I'm not a particularly good instrument. I'm just a normal. That's one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit. Maybe is that I don't know if I've really conveyed, like I talk about a lot of this stuff that has happened to me. It seems like extraordinary experiences, but I'm a pretty normal, regular person. Like most of my life, I was pretty embedded in the matrix, and I feel truly like if just through meditation, it's opened up this connection. But for different people, it can be art, it can be music, it can be whatever. It could be a gift to communicate with people in some way, or to open your heart. So these channels are just they're there. I think it's like we have seeds of possibility within us, and the bringing awareness, and stopping the flow of energy into these conditioned fears and patterns and jobs and all this stuff. It's like the stuff that we put all of our energy in life. Like you can bring that into alignment with these seeds and grow them together potentially.
Yeah. Nice. Mm-hmm. Rodrigo also wonders what your daily practice is.
It's right now, I would say, like it changes, because like right now I'm in the middle of a 10-day retreat, which we do. So I'm doing a lot of meditation, obviously, at that. But Tanya and I do about 2 hours every morning, and
2 hours of what?
Of seated meditation. So
how do you actually do it?
So yeah, when I meditate, I basically, for me, meditation now, it's really changed over the years. So, to me, it's in terms of what Krishnamurti speaks about as choiceless awareness. I think his description of choiceless awareness is probably the best description of where I've ended up. So for me, there's no doing in the meditation whatsoever. So there's a penetrating into what the mind is already doing, and then letting it go. Once the problem, the challenge, is most of what the mind is doing is unconscious. So we have to penetrate into the layers of mind, by being present, single-pointedly aware. But there's no doing in that. It's just being aware, and then mind patterns will become visible, and then we can drop those patterns, or they just sort of self-drop once they're conscious, because that you realize you're doing it, and then it's like, why am I doing that? So
does the 2 hours go pretty smoothly? Is it enjoyable, or are you sitting there kind of struggling for a couple hours?
It again depends, like it's like the practice is to be equanimous. So, things come and go, and sometimes there's incredible bliss, sometimes there's pain. But for me, like the practice has changed a lot over the years. Like at the beginning, there was definitely, at the beginning of the practice, there was a lot more pain and struggle and, slogging through, the mind. Now, if I look at what's happening in my mind during the meditation, there's a lot less mind activity, a lot less vrittis and thought. And there, I would say the actual droppings, the cessations are more frequent now than before.
So when people come to your center and learn to meditate and do a retreat, are you able to save them from a lot of the pain and struggle you went through, because you've kind of learned things that enable you to teach them in such a way as to do it more effortlessly from the outset?
Yes and no. I think there, anybody who comes, like you're going to have to learn to surrender inside. You're going to have to face your pain. So you're going to have to learn to stop this process of craving and aversion, and that when you're not reacting, that's a painful process for everyone. People go through that. They have awakenings and emotional releases, and they want to leave. They think this is hell. They take their little strolls through hell. But I think there are, I see the value of, if somebody has had previous experiences, I think there is value in being able to speak about what's going on. There are certain traps, certain pitfalls on the path. I think people can end up with concepts in their mind about what meditation is. And, if those concepts aren't dispelled, they can spend a lot of time just, polishing tiles, or with, one thing that often happens is people will, they get some idea about anatta or no self. They go into almost like a stupor state, or like a dull state. And there are a lot of pitfalls on the path.
So you help to sort of dispel some of those notions, yeah?
Yeah, that's really, I see as my role, at the center, is to just share, what I've learned. And I'm still constantly learning from people, understanding how this all works. And I feel like I'm still just at the beginning of my understanding of it.
It's a good attitude. I think we should all do that. And people, I'm sure, aren't kissing your feet.
No, and it really, like, I try and set up the relationship as well as I can. This is one of the things Tanya slaps me with all the time, because people do come and they think that I'm something.
I don't know, some kind of big shot or something.
Yeah, some kind of teacher, and like, to me, I just want to be free. I don't want to be playing out some teacher archetype, and if I am, I'm not free. If somebody has that label on me, they're not free, and I'm not free. And I truly see myself more as just, I want to be in more like a friend relationship with someone, just helping them on the spiritual path.
Yeah, a question just came in from someone named Chitra in California. She asks, meditation lately has been in different forms. If I do choiceless awareness, my mind is raising random thoughts, which I am aware of, and then I feel mantra or one-pointedness helps that. In other words, I guess just mantra is more helpful than random awareness or choiceless awareness. What do you recommend for general people to do to make rapid progress?
Well, the way we teach it at the center, like we kind of feel it out with every individual and every group. So kind of try and meet people where they're
Customize it, sort of.
Yeah. So there are people who really get the non-dual teachings, and that's what's going to help them at that particular point. Other times, we have tons of different techniques. Like if the mind is racing, you can start to really turn awareness towards thoughts themselves and start to penetrate into that pattern. So you can see thoughts are either visual, auditory, or sometimes they're both. So you can start to observe these different qualities of thinking, and you start to see whatever's going on. Any hindrance that's coming up, you're kind of doing the same thing. You're penetrating into the pattern in different ways, seeing the movement of the pattern, and then it's not like this gross kind of thing that's just overtaking you in consciousness, but you can start to keep an eye on the movement, and so there are a lot of tools like that, or there are Vipassana techniques of noting thoughts as well, like starting to understand what's happening. All of these tools can be useful, I think, at certain points in the journey to start to really bring awareness inside of the pattern and start to break it up. Start to get a sense of the energy of it and the movement of it.
Do you do some yoga there? When I used to do long courses, like 6 weeks, 6 months, we would break it up. Like we'd meditate for an hour or whatever, and then do 20 minutes of yoga postures, and then meditate another hour, and then do 20 minutes of yoga postures, just so as to kind of integrate.
Yes. Yeah, we do. We give it, basically it's self-directed. So we have an area in the Zendo where people can do walking meditation between sits, or they can stand up. We do not every day, but every second day we do like a yoga stretching kind of thing as well. For me, like the way I teach at the center, or the structure that we've created there, is very self-directed. So if people are, they're free to do what they want, and as long as it's not during, times where it's going to disturb other people.
Right. Yeah.
But
primal screen.
Yeah, like for me, like the whole yogic thing, like I did 2 years of hatha yoga, which was helpful for me to be able to sit on a cushion comfortably. And that's about it. I don't really go into all the asanas and stuff like that. That's not really part of what we're doing. We teach it more as just kind of stretching for the body to prepare it for sitting, basically. And and yoga, to me, what does that is different for different people. Like for me, I've tried different types of yoga, and where I've ended up, actually, it's completely changed over my lifetime. At one point, I was I was doing more traditional yoga, but now I feel like my yoga is what grounds me and brings me into my body. And living on the property, I work with wood. We heat our buildings with wood.
So you're chopping wood.
Chopping wood and chainsawing, actually.
Yeah.
Like to use a chainsaw, you have to be incredibly present and grounded, and it brings me right into my body. So I've my yoga is chainsaw yoga, and it's if I do a few hours of that and then I go sit, like it's amazing to me. It brings me, because I tend to be like my Vata dosha. I tend to be just ethereal, and going off, and to be here is important for me. Whereas for other people, it's about lightening up. It's about the opposite. They want to be breaking up the pattern. So, somebody who is a different dosha, they might, a Kundalini yoga class might be better because it's like creating all this upward moving energy. And so, I think we try and meet people, give them the tools that will work for them.
Be careful with that chainsaw. I sliced my leg open with one last year because I wasn't being mindful enough. Like you just said, you need to be mindful, and I would recommend wearing protective gear too.
Yeah, good advice.
Yeah. Paul from San Marcos, California wants to know, did your Vipassana experience heal your physical ailments?
Yeah, interesting. Like my first of all, my idea of what healing is changed dramatically. So at the beginning, I just wanted to be able to go back and eat the crappy foods that I was feeding my body, and that to me was what I thought healing was. So my idea of healing completely changed, and I started to tune into what my body actually wanted. That took many years. But yes, it like for me in that Vipassana experience, like the pancreas area was, when you do the body scan, it was completely offline. There was no sensation. And then at a certain point, after quite a bit of meditation, it started to wake up, and incredible pain, like a sword turning, and for hours and hours and hours, and eventually, it would start to dissolve as I got into deeper states of absorption. And the first moment when at those retreats, S.N. Goenka is always saying, everything arises and passes away. It's all impermanent. And he even says, you probably think your pain is different. Yours is going to last forever. And I really did. I really thought this one is never going to go away, because this is like a serious bodily, problem. And it was quite amazing when it actually dissolved the first time. And of course it came back, and I had to dissolve it again, and over and over and over.
Your type 1 diabetes and your arthritis are gone now?
Yes, yeah. So I have no symptoms, and I was told that I had to go on insulin for the rest of my life, and
you don't.
I don't. So yeah,
that's awesome.
So yeah. So I'm symptom free, but if I went back to eating KFC and drinking lime coolers, I'd be back.
You'd probably get sick again.
I shouldn't say anything bad about KFC. I might get in trouble.
Okay, so here's one final question that Irene sent over to me. I'll ask this, and then we'll just sort of wrap it up and have you tell us about how people can get in touch and what they can do. This one is again from Rez in New York City. He wants to know, I've heard that there are many paths to enlightenment, but some point in the wrong direction, even while speaking of enlightenment. Don't we need to exercise discretion in an age of the internet?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think like skepticism, for me, I would say don't believe anything at all.
Good point.
Like, period. I seriously do not believe anything, and find out within yourself whether
the Buddha
it's true.
said that, you're quoting the Buddha there. Have you heard that quote?
Yeah, I think, do you know the quote?
Basically, it's just, don't believe anything because somebody said it, even if I say it, the Buddha. But check it out in your own experience and with your own reason and understanding.
Yeah, like I'm a total skeptic. Like I hear about all these different things, and I don't disbelieve anything, but I don't believe anything either. I want
scientific attitude.
Verify and see what's true. And I wouldn't believe a word that's coming out of my mouth, if I hadn't experienced it. So check it out. Like, do the meditation. If there's one thing that will convey to someone, I'd love to get high level scientists in a room doing this type of meditation. And like, to me, this is where it gets interesting. And to see the nature of reality, but find out, use the body, use yourself as a laboratory.
I think that science and a scientific attitude has a lot to offer spirituality, and I also think that spirituality has a lot to offer science, because there's a lot that science is never going to be able to explore without the spiritual techniques and, and the proper utilization of the ultimate scientific instrument, which is our own mind and body.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the Samadhi Center. I'm just going to show the website on the screen here. You have the Samadhi Center up there somewhere out in the boonies, somewhere between Toronto and Montreal. Looks like a beautiful place.
Yeah,
here we
almost
are
dead center.
May 6th, and you tell me there's still half a foot of snow on the ground in the woods. So
deep
tell
in
us
the
about
woods.
that.
About the snow or the
No, not the snow, but about the Samadhi Center. And just, like if people have become intrigued by listening to this interview, what can they do? Both in terms of just visiting your website. Firstly, they can watch your movies, which are online and are free. They can visit your website. I think there's some meditation techniques they can learn from there. If they want to go even further, they can come to Canada, right?
Yeah, we do personal retreats. So you can just come and do a self-directed retreat. Basically, you'd be meditating with Tanya and I in the morning, and we're available for instruction. And then the more formal retreats, like the 10-day retreats, are intensive meditation, which you're basically doing meditation most of the day, and it's broken up by different things. We use sound as well.
Would you advise that someone who's never really done meditation come in cold and just plunge into something like that, or do you recommend that there be some kind of experience first building up to it?
I think anyone, sometimes having experience, and people who are really holding on to techniques and traditions sometimes have a harder time because they have to let go of that first. So I'd say anybody can do it, and it's an amazing way to get grounded in a meditation practice. So I would say, we encourage all levels, beginner to advanced.
Great. Well, I'll link to your website, and I'll link to your films and everything, and people can get in touch with you and watch the films. And what have you got planned for the future with your reams and reams of notes? What's going to happen with that?
Yeah, so the next film, the working title is The Pathless Path. And so part 2, we kind of left off by saying, there's no way to the way, there's no how, that the mind can grasp. So part 3, we're going to tell you how.
Good. Cool. Yeah, I always like paradox and contradiction.
Yeah. So, part 3 is going to be going into the perennial teaching, really looking at what is happening in the different meditation traditions and contemplative traditions, and trying to get to the essence of what is happening, to strip away the self-structure so that the awareness can shine through.
Wonderful. Well, I think it's a great service you're doing, and I hope you do it for many, many years to come. Obviously, a lot of people are watching it and getting inspired and benefited by it, so keep it up.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. So, as anyone still watching realizes and knows, I've been speaking with Daniel Schmidt, who has made the Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, and Samadhi films. And I'll be creating a page for him on Batgap, which links to those things and to his website and everything else, so you can get in touch with Daniel. Next week, I'll be interviewing Michael Pollan, who wrote How to Change Your Mind, and Christopher Bosch, who also wrote a book about psychedelics. I think it's called Diamonds from Heaven is the subtitle. And I think that is going to be a fascinating discussion. We'll be talking about psychedelics and what these two have experienced. Michael is relatively new to it. Chris Bosch spent 20 years taking quite high dosage LSD trips in an extremely controlled way. He stopped doing that about 20 years ago, but he did it for 20 years. And so check it out. Well, if you'd like to be notified of new interviews when they're posted, sign up on batgap.com. There's a little mailing list thing. If you'd like to listen to these as an audio podcast, there's a tab for that on the site, and a number of other things. Just explore around and stay tuned. We hope to be doing this like Daniel, for many years to come. So thanks, Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
Okay, stay in touch.
You too.
Bye-bye.